Okay, hello and welcome everyone to another episode of the Masculinity Unmasked podcast, the fortnightly conversation which delves deep into the issues impacting men today. We're here to have the conversations you might not be having elsewhere, honest, open, sometimes uncomfortable, but always important. So the title for today's episode is Unconscious Shields, a psychodynamic exploration of self. And I'm very lucky to have with me Deborah Tamir, who is a psychodynamic counselor and transformational life coach, and also a good friend. So Deborah and I met on a retreat many moons ago. So Deborah, really good to have you here today. Do you want to start by sharing a little bit about who you are and the sort of work that you do?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Max. So I am a BACP accredited psychodynamic counselor and transformational life coach certified with She Leads. And so I combine these two approaches, working with clients online and then in the NHS in a clinical setting and in third age counseling with people of 50 plus in person. I originally had a career spanning teaching and then working in the corporate world. And always the threads that lay between all of the work I've done is people, fascinated by people from such an early age and what really lies beneath the surface.
Yeah.
What's going on for them on on a deeper level.
Mm.
And using that to I've always wanted to help and see how I can serve best and use my own experiences of suffering to ease the pain for others and help us
Yeah.
have these conversations.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And it's funny how much of that I could relate to as well in my own journey. It's funny how much of us go from that corporate journey to, this this work that involves helping others and sort of bringing some of our own experiences of suffering into that space. So we have that sort of common understanding. So yeah, and so you describe yourself as a psychodynamic counselor, and you mentioned in there about psychodynamic work. So for the benefit of the listeners who probably haven't even heard what that term before, psychodynamic, they might have heard of therapy, but not psychodynamic. What actually are we talking about here? And I know that just before we came on, we were saying this is such a huge topic. How can we even begin to make a dent in explaining what is psychodynamic theory?
I will do my very best to describe an easy way, because we could talk for hours, and we often
Yeah.
do, about these topics. This theory suggests that we are driven and guided by unconscious patterns that are out of our conscious awareness. A bit like an iceberg. If you think of an iceberg, there's the tip, which is the conscious mind, but beneath the tip, there's a massive structure underneath in the sea, which represents the unconscious, the drives, the feelings, forgotten memories, desires, automatic patterns, actually representing 80% and 20% is the tip. And it steers the ship often. And so a lot of the psychodynamic work is about uncovering these unconscious patterns and helping us be aware of them, no judgment, but being aware helps us have more agency and control and an ability to respond.
Yeah, powerful stuff. And it's amazing how so many of us aren't even aware of what's steering our ship. And it's not until we get into therapy space that we start to unpack and explore some of that stuff. 80%, 20%, if you just let that land for a moment, that's incredible, isn't it? Like what's actually beneath the surface and how much there is to tap into. And I know that there's sort of talk of the unconscious or subconscious, and this is something we've talked about before, the difference maybe between the two. What are we talking about with the unconscious or subconscious, and what are sort of parts that are involved in all of this?
Yeah, so all of these terms we use interchangeably, and psychodynamic follows a kind of Freudian, or some theories follow a Freudian school of thought.
Mm.
And Freud spoke of the unconscious in terms of three parts of the mind: the id, the ego, and the superego. You might have heard of the term ego, perhaps more
Yeah.
recently. The id is the part of our mind with the really primitive early desires, impulses set up from when we were young. They might have the sexual impulses in there. Our pleasure principle is what he called them. Think of like a toddler wanting the innate want of a toddler. And then the superego is this internalized moral compass. What we were told as parents that we should do, what society tells us to do. Often with men, it's men don't cry. and we shouldn't be talking about our feelings, and that becomes internalized, and that's called the superego. And we all have that. We all have the id, we have the superego, and superego can be more strict and severe in cases that causes suffering. The ego sits in the middle and balances out both the id and the superego on a reality principle. It's kind of the rational part, but it also is the seat of our defense mechanisms. So we have these defense mechanisms, all of us have them, to help protect us, to help us function in life, to help us manage all of these overwhelming feelings. And they actually they can be very adaptive. The problem is when they become too rigid and they stop serving us, and when we're not aware of them. So often they can become quite unconscious.
Right. Yeah, it's fascinating. All of those different elements together, like you say, I'm sure most of us have heard of ego, and it almost gets a very negative rap, doesn't it? We're being egotistical. It's got this stigma attached to it. But the id and the superego, not many of us have heard of, I imagine. You said the ego sort of protects us from what? What are we talking about here?
It's how we define ourselves, and we have to function in society. We have to have earn money. There's a reality to our lives. We often, as children, had to fit into families. This was to survive, and the ego helps us survive. So it creates methods and mechanisms for us to establish a way of seeing the world, a way of operating in the world, and a sense of identity. And it does get a bad rep. It's because it can sometimes not be an authentic identity, or it can become an identity that was set up when we were younger at a certain period of time that no longer reflects us anymore, or it doesn't actually carry the true us in it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really interesting. That sort of the true us in it. What is the true us in it from a psychodynamic perspective?
This is an evolving process. And actually, it's so common. I'm working with an 80-year-old client, actually, who is discovering his innate sense of self for the first time. It's actually such a privilege and honor to work with him, because actually it's very common. Many of us are still trying to discover our sense of self, those impulses, what makes us us. We've internalized a lot of what's around us, absorbing perhaps family, friends, ways of living. We've been told how we've been told to operate, necessarily carry us. And actually, this is why a lot of the work in psychodynamic counseling is about going into the feelings, because feelings can really give us a sense of us. It's a way of tapping in to our innate sense of self, desires, our wishes, our strong reactions to things. A lot of this process is discovering ourselves.
Yeah. And that can, I guess, feel quite overwhelming to people. Mentioned the word feelings, especially for men, to bring feelings into a space with somebody to do this deeper work. That could feel, terrifying for some people. So how do you as a counselor sort of create a space that's safe for somebody to start this journey of exploration into self?
I think the first thing to really say is that there is no judgment here. We all have feelings we're managing. We have these defenses. We have this self we're trying to understand. And it takes time. And there is no shoulds in this process. And the kind of beauty of what you do and what I do is having someone there consistently every week they are there for you. You're both on a journey together, exploring the client's mind, exploring the client's feelings. We're both journeying through that together. And there's that space for you that you can turn up every week and have that space held for you, where we often don't have that. And with no judgment and no agenda, really just to uncover more and more with no agenda of any outcome. Once you start the process, often I find that it becomes easier and easier, and you get associations, and the work happens outside of the therapy room. Things are coming up, more emotions, like the whole plethora of emotions come into play, because often we're just operating in a very narrow sense, very narrow feeling. And suddenly trim comes up, which can be quite scary, easy. It's really not. And so it's just being gentle, and being curious and gentle with how it wants to show itself.
Yeah, I love that. It's almost like a container for exploration, right? A safe container for exploration. It's rare that we find in society anywhere else that's like that, where we have that independent thinking part that can take us on that journey of exploration in that way. And yeah, the exploration of emotion part as well that you talked to is so interesting, isn't it? Because the last retreat that we went on, for me, what I was exploring is my relationship to anger and frustration as part of many other things, and how I haven't really had a relationship with anger or frustration. So this is very new for me, but I've needed to have safe spaces to be able to explore that. And that's only become apparent for me recently. And that's some work that I've been doing as well. So you can be surprised on this journey that actually the more that you unpack, the more you explore, the more of self that you see, right? And the more powerful that the journey can be. You've talked a lot about the word defense, and I'm sure we all know what defense means, but in the psychological sense, in a psychodynamic sense, what are we talking about here with defense mechanisms?
So it's almost a bit like a protective shield, um, that has at one point kept us safe. Many of them develop when we're really young. Many are unconscious, some are conscious, some are unconscious. So an example of a defense mechanism is humor, even.
Mm,
Now, it has a place, humor, but sometimes it's used because there's a really uncomfortable feeling underneath it. So that's
mm,
often quite an easy defense to recognize. And then there's other defenses, for example, intellectualization, something I'm privy to, which is to analyze and try to understand and make sense because we don't really want to be feeling. And
mm,
it's actually, again, a very endorsed defense, like humor is perhaps, where we are given praise for intellectualization in working world and expressing ourselves in that way using language. Then there's other really primitive defenses. These are often very unconscious, set up from a very, very young age. And one of these is projection. So projection is where the disowned, we don't like parts of ourselves. For example, you said about anger. We don't like that angry part. So that
mm,
gets disowned, and we then see the anger in others, and we see the anger in others, and we reject that in the other.
mm,
A common one is I have clients saying, "Oh, their partner's too needy." And in the exploration, we work to see that there's parts of the client that has wants and is feeling needy themselves,
mm,
actually, putting it as the other person is having that. So a lot of projection happens. And we did all of this to keep us safe. We want to feel our goodness sometimes and the bad
mm,
part being placed somewhere else. And we can then have control over that. We can push that away. Harder when we recognize it as part of us. And again, none of this, we all have this, and we all have these difficult parts. So it's
mm.
really befriending, accepting, and just awareness. But it helps us integrate, helps us become fully alive as, the dark, the shadow, and the lighter part.
Yeah, yeah, that's so important to speak to that, isn't it? That we all have shadow parts, we all have the lighter parts,
Mm.
and it's about befriending. That's such a strong word as well here, because it's not about criticism, judgment, blame. Therapist, counselor's not going to sit there and say to you, you're wrong for having these feelings, but it's about, might gently challenge you, but it's about an exploration to help you befriend, understand, and live your life in a way that's more aligned, I guess, to who you really truly want to be.
Absolutely. And I want to stress that at one point or another, these defenses are really helpful. They're actually,
Mm,
we can't go around angry all the time. We have to put a bit of a lid. Sometimes in the process of grief, for example, stage of denial, stages, they are, anger, that they're needed. And so it's actually just being curious rather than avoiding or repressing any of these, because actually the repressing in itself can actually cause us more suffering. They can come up in physical issues in the body. It's starting to get curious with different parts of us.
yeah. And that's so interesting, isn't it? Because one thing we were chatting about So we often have these conversations about things like this because we're both really fascinated by it. But I talked about my back, and I have a lot of lower back issues. I say I have a lot of lower back issues. I get back pain, and the sort of psychosomatic connection between brain and body. And there's somebody called John Sarno who speaks a lot to how people who don't express anger and frustration can hold tension in their bodies, and he calls it meiosis attention syndrome. I think it is. But that's really fascinating to hear you talk about the repression and how it can hold itself in the body. There's the book, The Body Keeps the Score, as well, right? So the body quite literally can hold on to these things that we're repressing and shoving down and compartmentalizing, and does something in the body with them. And that's another really important thing to speak about. We're not just walking around as necks in society, are we? Like, there is a body that's attached to the neck and the brain.
And the body speaks, and it often speaks through the symptoms. So the back pain is sort of, Max, I need you. Something's going on. I'm in pain. And it links to something emotional, perhaps, or a memory. So it's really quite clever in a way how it operates. It's another way of speaking to us. And its body can also give us a really helpful indication of what's going on in our unconscious.
For sort of men listening to this who are really interesting sort of going on this journey, but they're right at the beginning of this journey, they said they've never had any therapy, they've never had any counselling. What would you say to them as a sort of a way into all of this world? It doesn't feel overwhelming.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many things we can do, even if without a therapist. I think journaling is something I think is really helpful. Keeping a journal by your bed. Start with free flow. So free flowing journaling for, let's say, a timer of 15 minutes. And let whatever wants to come up. We're not going to publish this. This isn't for anyone's view. This is just letting what wants to come up. And it's, in a way, what we're doing here is bypassing that censorship. To start to get curious with what wants to come up. And it's a way, and once you start that process, you'll find it easier and easier, and things will come up. Journal your dreams. So Freud said the dreams are the royal road to the unconscious. It's not about analyzing the dreams. It's just write down the dreams when you have them and start to think what it might mean for you. What feelings came up? What people exist in them? Did you have any strong associations to those dreams? So you can start to get to know yourself through that process. Yeah, notice your strong reactions. Notice what bothers you in other people. We're very relational creatures. So often our patterns, we might be fine on our own. And as soon as we go and see our partner, the boss, a very strong reaction comes up in us. And of course, that can often mirror earlier patterns. And we're reacting to the boss or the partner as though they are a critical mother or a depressed father who didn't pay much attention to us. Notice your reactions, and that will start to tell you your patterns. Another good way of kind of getting to know yourself is to see what kind of role you tend to play in groups. Again, like what I was saying about being relational, we'll often play a role, and that can show us a lot about perhaps where we feel comfortable and how we respond to people. And I also feel that this is the hardest thing, but in such a noisy, chaotic world, we must let ourselves have some quiet. Unconscious needs quiet to emerge. We need to start to listen to ourselves to really feel more comfortable with just being with without any distractions. And this can be 10 minutes. Doesn't have to be meditation. Can just be sitting doing nothing and allowing yourself to do nothing. These are all things you can start to do to get to know yourself and not needing any therapist. It starts this process.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I think, I think for everybody, but especially men, we can feel like we've got to run on this corporate treadmill at all costs in expense of our health, a provision, and not ever take a pause and never stop to examine and become self-aware. And a lot of us only do this work when we get to a point where we've reached collapse. And I think, one of my missions is to help more men not have to get to that point to begin to start to do some of this work. You talked about patterns. If we can identify patterns early on, we can start to do some of that inner work to help us make our lives a little bit easier. If we're having angry outbursts, if we're people pleasing all the time, if we're burying our head in the sand and not able to talk about anything, we're repressing things, what's going on here really, and how can we be helped and move forward on that journey?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's called the repetition compulsion, where these patterns have a compulsion to repeat. We almost want to keep doing them so we find a different answer. And we
Mm.
find, and so what happens is we'll go into one relationship, leave that relationship because this happened. Then you go into another one, and the same pattern comes up.
Yeah.
And in jobs, so the common denominator is you. So it's just start to look at what's going on for you, and only through that process we can start to, through awareness, we can start to have the agency to change. And that's a really important part of my work as well. I want to not
Mm.
just, the insight is one thing, but there's empowering my clients to change, to move forward, to find ways that serve them better. Uh,
Mm.
and that is really, really important in terms of lessening that suffering that we're feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. And speaking that gives hope, right, to people who are about to embark on this journey, that people do come through the other side, or they get a lot from this work to help them shift and move forward. So what might that journey look like? I know it's very different depending on the person, but what might a typical journey look like from somebody first entering that therapy space to starting to grow and develop? What might that?
I want to say, and it's really important, that it's not always an easy process. It does
Mm.
take courage. It can be very uncomfortable work. So, you're dismantling defenses that are really rigid and have really served you. Suddenly
Mm.
things are coming up. There's that process that can feel difficult. And there isn't really any bypassing of that difficulty. In fact, that actually makes us stronger. What
Mm.
happens over time is we can become a container for all these feelings ourselves and develop a kind of strength,
Yeah.
developing our ego, essentially, our sense of self. We can manage these id impulses are coming up. We're recognizing some of these superego patterns or the defenses. But then there's something strengthening in us that we can
Mm.
start to gives us a sense we can manage. And from that place, a space emerges. So we're aware of our patterns and we have this agency and a space to respond. It's not
Mm.
so automatic. That's kind of the loosening of the unconscious. So we're more conscious, and
Yeah.
the aim is to have a more grip on ourselves. And in relationships, curious, but we're holding strong. We're not self-abandoning. And I find then the byproduct of strengthening that sense of self is these improved relationships.
Yeah. Yeah.
Looking at, is feeling all the people that depend on you, it's generous to them. And you're starting to model for them how to look after themselves and go through this process. The
Mm.
generous act for yourself and others. And it's it's not a shameful thing. And it's also, I really agree with you that it's not, therapy and coaching isn't about crisis time. A process of, I have a therapist, many therapists have therapists, process of being curious, and there's always unconscious parts that want to show themselves to you. It's
Yeah.
a journey.
For all of us, therapists, coaches, everyone, as a human being, there's all of these parts, and all of us are on a journey of growth in some way, shape, or form, in the sense that we are literally, growing in some senses, if you think about age and getting older and things, but we're also psychologically growing. We're learning all the time. So I think speaking to those two things is so important. That idea of, yes, it's going to be uncomfortable at times and challenging at times because we're quite literally dismantling some of this stuff, but also it could be incredibly grounding and refreshing and expansive as well. There's a lot of positives from going on that journey, and your life can quite literally change off the back of that.
So many clients, they literally, after, it's such an honor actually, after a couple of years, I mean, a couple of 6 months sometimes, people are responding differently to them. There's this agency, a potency that's developing,
Mm.
parts of them they're reclaiming from when they were younger, and a real sense of self-pride and strength. And so, like, the work can happen very quickly.
Yeah.
The change in people, and everyone, I believe, I have that optimism that we can change,
Mm.
and life is about growth and expansion,
Mm.
and we've got to enjoy that process.
Yeah. 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 And it's something that we're all entitled to,
Hmm.
you know we're all entitled to this. So there is no exception. And I think that's the key if you're thinking about yourself and starting this journey. There is no shame in the space. There is no exception. Everyone is entitled to go on this journey. So if you're listening to this and feeling, curious, you could start to have some discovery calls with counsellor therapists or start to do some research in relation to that. Slightly break the ice on it, or what might be some other ways that people could gently find their way into this work, do you think?
Absolutely. And also, don't be afraid to shop around with
Mm,
therapists and coaches. The relationship is super important. You have
yeah,
to feel comfortable, and you'll have a feeling. You'll have sense of whether that person, you could work well with them. And so, go be curious with that journey too.
yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. Okay. We could talk for hours on this. It's such a big topic, and I always love talking to you. What are any other words that you would give to our listeners to finish off, whether that's by way of takeaways or anything else that you would want to say to anyone listening to this who might be curious about therapy before we finish up?
Yeah, it's as we said, it's not for people who are necessarily broken. It's for curious people, and I really want to emphasize that. And if you're considering therapy and coaching, just maybe scratch that itch, have a discovery call, just contact them and see if it is a good fit. And you are in control of that process. Being curious with yourself is a gift, as I said, for yourself and for the people around you.
Mm,
So it's yeah, it can be a real enriching experience for you to start to live more fully.
yeah.
And we're never too old to change. Like I said about my 80-year-old client,
Yeah, I love that.
him for the first time, and it's like a new lease for him. We're never too old to change.
What a great thing to end on. Okay, well, thanks so much, Deborah, for delving into this topic with us. It's been great to get stuck in and hear your thoughts. And thanks to everyone that's listened. Hope you found the conversation useful. So, Deborah, if people do want to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
Yeah, you can find me on deborahtamirtherapy.com and just book in to have a discovery call with me, free
Yeah,
consultation. So I have a bit about me on there. And yeah, that's the way to contact me. And my email, deborahtamir at gmail.
great. And we'll drop your info on the show notes as well. So if anyone resonates with this topic, you've maybe had some psychodynamic theory and you want to share anything, psychodynamic counseling or therapy, I should say, and you want to share your experience of that, or if you have any ideas on other topics that you would like us to talk about in the future, please do get in contact. We always like to hear from you. But otherwise, that's it from us until next time. Take care, everyone. Thank you.